Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 383, English Fairy Tales. Now, keep in mind, this isn't just for little kids. If you actually know anything about folklore, some of it can be kind of morbid. This is no exception. Link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my book's blogs, 171 pages, so this is full length. The first section, the first roughly almost 40 pages, is a dissertation on fairies. Now, when we look at the etymology of the word fairy, and then we look at the evolution of the concept, especially in England, of English fairy tales, of the English fairy, there are two separate, distinct sort of ideas. On the linguistic side, it mainly comes from the idea of larvae or fae from Italian, fanes. The funny thing is that really, if you look at the nature of what's being described, it's kind of like goblins or incubi, quasi-demonic beings, usually malevolent. Therefore, the term in English parlance is actually disconnected from the idea. The idea has more in common with nymphs, or certain earth spirits that are spoken of in various cultures, the Lamia or something. Very interesting subject. And you look at Hermeticism, the idea of the gnomes and the sylphs and the salamanders and the undines, and fairies would be the airy portion stemming off of that, and it's an interesting subject. So the first part is a dissertation. It's purely academic. Then it goes on to relate some of these fairy tales, and the number is quite high. The two big ones, Jack and the Beanstalk, which includes giants and kind of like a fairy godmother creature. And then Jack the Giant Slayer, that involves as well various cryptozoological creatures, although giants are the main one. So in this English folkloric compilation, which is some kind of Grimm style, like Jacob Grimm, Grimm's Fairy Tales, if you've ever read that, very morbid. Hansel and Gretel, definitely on the top of the list there, when Hansel undoes a door by taking the bone out of one of his fingers, actually. This is, while technically for children, it was also believed in by adults as well. Part of the anthropological section dwells on discovery of witchcraft by Reginald Scott. And what's pointed out is that people who had all these weird superstitions because they were told as children about Robin Goodfellow, famous fairy figure in folklore, and all of these other bugbears, the Boggart, and all of these other weird beings, elves and gnomes and the devil, featuring prominently in multiple stories. There's an interesting story about the Cobbler cheating the devil. I'll relate that in a moment. But the adults believed in it too. They go out in the woods at night by lantern light, and they've got their load of wood or whatever. They're getting home, and they hear an owl or something, and they think that it's, a witch. And this was a thing until very, very recently. Even now, people get spooky and are out in the woods at night alone and stuff. I think that, though, is the funniest of these stories. It's one of the shorter inclusions. It's how the cobbler cheated the devil. So the devil's I'll just relate it. The devil's coming to a small town to destroy it with a big-ass rock because they were mocking him and ridiculing his lack of power under, I guess, the auspices of God. And so he's slowly making his way towards his town with this huge-ass rock. And a cobbler says at the council that they've drawn up to try to stop the devil, I'll take care of it. And he goes out with a sack full of used-up old shoes. And then he finds the devil, and the devil's sitting there resting because he's out of breath from carrying, a boulder the size of a house that he wants to smash up this town with. And he asks the cobbler how far away he has still to go, because the cobbler says that he's from the town that the devil's going to. This is a spoiler, I guess, but never mind. And he says, oh yeah, it's a really, really far distance away. Look at all the shoes that I wore out on the way here to meet you. And the devil sees this pile of old worn out boots, and he's like, oh, I don't think this is going to be worth it. I thought it was closer. And so then he goes back to hell. That gives you a little bit of the dry English humor aspect. The idea of trickery is in almost all of these different works. Trickery and stealth. Those are the two big things. And they usually have a cautionary tale. They were meant for children initially, but those children continued to believe in these things when they were being related up basically until the modern era. Well into the 19th century, outside of urban areas would have been well into the 20th. People still have this kind of folkloric aspect. Now, folklore, oddly enough, is making a resurgence because of the internet. So, the anthropology of the study of folklore is hardly at a historical end. Again, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. You'll like this. It's funny stories mostly, a little bit of the gruesome and grim as well, some gloomy content there. Some untied up ends with Jack and the Beanstalk, because of course the giant's wife is now trapped up in his mansion alone and still miserable, presumably. Second and third links to my books, blogs. I enjoyed editing this because I like fairy tales too. I like a little bit of the light side of the occult and the mystic sometimes, not just, boiling heads on the stove in order to invoke the devil. That's about all. Peace out.